Thank you guys so much for coming. This topic is something that's really near and dear to our hearts as YIMBYs. Affordability is a huge pillar of why we do what we do, and the housing element is a great tool, really important tool for achieving that across the state of California, in small towns as well as big cities as well. So we're going to start off with John Wizard. He's going to talk about the parts of the housing element that really serve to support affordable housing and promote affordable housing. And then I will take the mic and talk about the housing element process for folks who haven't kind of seen that narrative arc, and so you can prepare for your own region, your own city, to be a part of the housing element update process. So John, handing the mic to you now.
Thanks, Jess. Housing elements are just the most dry thing possible, and it's so critically important. I feel like maybe somebody did that on purpose, but I hope not. Affordable housing is the stealth element in a stealth component of a housing element that is like, it's sort of like, that it's there, it's supposed to be part of it, but it's not treated as though it's some special thing. It's kind of just lumped in all together. And so you really have to focus and be intentional about how you're reading a housing element, how you're advocating, and the pieces of the housing element that you're leveraging to make those arguments, to submit those public comments, to organize around the provision of more affordable housing through this long-range policy document. Just could you do the next slide, please? Thank you. So for the purposes of our conversation, I'm going to lean pretty heavily on the city of Santa Monica. I appreciate that it's nowhere in the Bay Area, it's nowhere even in the northern part of the state, but we have the benefit of watching the LA region and San Diego kind of go through these motions before we have to in the Bay Area. And so we can learn from their mistakes, and we can critique and scrutinize the things they do to see how they may or may not apply to our home communities or the places we work. So Santa Monica has to accommodate roughly 9,000 new homes over the course of the 8-year period from 2021 to 2029. One thing you'll notice, though, is that for the purposes of affordable housing, they're required to plan for 69% of their housing, or roughly 5,500 homes, 6,200 homes, that will be very low, low, or moderate. So moderate is this weird category that's like both affordable and not affordable. So when we talk about lower income housing, that's extremely low, very low, and low, but it's not moderate because you can go over the median income and moderate. You can go up to 120%. But in terms of affordable housing, you can still count moderate. Moderate housing project is a totally allowable, it's included in density bonus, it's included in inclusionary housing ordinances, and it's a perfectly fine income category to target when you're building affordable housing. So I say all that to say that it doesn't, nowhere in here is there an asterisk or a special headline that says affordable housing, but 3/4 of the income brackets that the city must plan for are affordable types of income categories that will become the foundation of the plan. Yeah, that's it for this slide. So there's a requirement in state law that cities and counties report their annual progress toward meeting the RHNA of the current cycle they're in. And so for Southern California, the cycle's 2013 through 2021, but you get to report in April of the following year. So we just got the numbers for 2020. And by the time April 2022 rolls around to report what happened this year, they'll already have a new housing element. They'll already be in a new planning period. So a little bit of technicality there, but all that's to say that 2013 to 2020 so far, the city of Santa Monica has built about 85% of their very low income, about 65% of the low income, only 18% of the moderate income, but golly, almost 300% of their above moderate income. Why is that? Well, I mean, superficially, we all know that affordable housing doesn't cost less to build and to entitle and to construct and to finalize and lease up, get ready for people to move in. Housing is housing. Of course, you can switch out components. You can do double pipe versus single pipe for plumbing. You can do solar panels or no solar panels. You can do hardwood floors or tile. But big picture, housing is housing. It costs the same. So why is it that it's so hard to build affordable housing? And that's because the amount of money that someone is going to pay to either rent it or buy it isn't there. It has to be subsidized somehow. But for above moderate income housing, the buyer or renter is going to pay that full amount. So that's called a gap. That gap financing is what helps the affordable housing get built. Is somebody, typically the government or nonprofit contributions, will pay that future missing sale price or future missing rent to lower the price over time. And we see across the entire state, there are some places that are famous, just, we don't want any new housing at all. We don't want to say yes to anything. But where places allow things to get built, typically you see off the chart in above moderate and fits and bursts for the affordable housing. Next slide, please. So this is the same information, but represented graphically. You can see that almost, for the first 2 years, all the data that was reported in 2013, data reported in 2014, it's roughly proportional. And then as you get to 2016 and you start looking back a year, 2016, the data just does not support that there is an equal relationship between the number of homes that are above moderate income that are being built and the number of homes below moderate, and below median income that are being built. And of course, you see that huge spike right in the middle. So one of the reasons why you see this proportionality, at least in the beginning, is because the density bonus law says if you build, I'll just make up a number for easy math, if you build 100 homes, you're allowed, if you deed restrict 20 of them from moderate income, you're allowed to build more homes to make up that lost profit from building things that will return less revenue. You're allowed to build extra to kind of make up that revenue and subsidize those affordable homes within your own development. And then they'll sprinkle in a couple extra to kind of sweeten the pie, make it something attractive and incentivize it. So you often get these relationships. You have a little bit of affordable and a lot of above moderate, and they'll kind of continue like that over time. But sometimes it just isn't financially worthwhile for certain developers to bother. And they'd rather pay fees, they'd rather dedicate land, they'd rather buy a parcel from somebody else and donate that to the city so that they just don't have to mess with the affordability requirements. So that's oftentimes where you see this disproportionality, like you see in that spike for 2017 and forward from there, where in 2019, hardly any affordable housing, certainly no very low income. And it's just, we already didn't have a lot and now there's even less. Next slide, please. So these slides are very complicated, and I only show them just for illustrative purposes to show you that the city did a study, Santa Monica did a study of its fee structure, of its building height limits, of its, the maximum amount of square footage you could cover on a given parcel. And they figured out that for the majority of the different zones within their city, the different neighborhoods, it was totally infeasible to build even a 7.5% proportion of extremely low income housing units for development. So you're going to build 100 apartments. If 8 of them were for people making 30% of the, or less of the median income, across all those ones with the red bars, it's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, the red words, less likely, least likely. It just doesn't pencil. A developer would never do it because they would lose money. The ones that say marginal, they might make enough to make it worth their trouble, but they're probably not going to pursue them unless they have some kind of extraordinary motivation or outside funding source. The ones that are most likely, that's where they can actually make the profit. And so that's the ones they're going to build. So only in 3 of the city's neighborhoods does this kind of development make financial sense for someone who's looking for a profit. And if you're not looking for a profit, then you're going to need either the government or a nonprofit partner to fill in that funding gap so that you can still do the building. Next slide, please. And so this is the same information, but for very low income, which is 31 to 50%. And the way that Santa Monica has its rules set up is if you do extremely low income, 0 to 30%, you only have to do 7.5% of your development. If you do 31% of the median income up to 50%, then they say, well, that you're going to make more money. And so we want a different quantity, a different relationship to the very low income units. So you have to do double the amount of the extremely low income. You have to do 15% very low income units. And you can see that in all of those neighborhoods, in the least likely, there's no way you would lose money doing it. And that's not how capitalism works. There's only one where it's marginal. So again, special considerations, and then 2 where it makes financial sense and you can expect that those sites will just naturally get developed. Next slide, and this will be the last one with this much information in it. This is for standard, moderate, 20% affordable housing or mixing affordability levels. And you can see again, it's those last 3 neighborhoods where it's either almost worthwhile or it's getting closer to being worthwhile. But nearly every other zone in the city, you wouldn't even bother. And so that kind of maps out across all of our different cities and communities where what are these artificial constraints that we have? Do we limit the building height? Do we say you have to have big front yards for our duplexes and fourplexes? Do we require a certain amount of parking spots that makes the project infeasible because by the time you complete all the parking, there's no space left for the building? Do we charge a huge amount of money to process your permit request? And so by the time you can even start building, you've already spent $100,000 a unit or something like that. All of those things reduce the amount of housing we can actually build. Next slide, please.
I have a clarifying question, John. This is just,
yes.
Is this feasibility study was about the inclusionary zoning ordinance, right? This is not density bonus where they get a incentive. This would just be an extra requirement on housing.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. Jess is right. This is City of Santa Monica did an inclusionary housing ordinance, which is an exaction. It's for the privilege of building in our city. These are the rules we have. Now, there's a state density bonus law where you get those, you can get the extra units that I talked about when I first started talking about this, but that's a different thing. And the City of Santa Monica is saying, sure, you can use the density bonus, but we're still going to extract all this stuff from you if you want to build here. And sometimes they overlap, but it's an exaction that makes things more expensive across the entire balance sheet of your project.
And just an observation too, because I'm a planner and this is my lens, but I can definitely see that Bergamot and downtown have higher, they have more generous height restrictions, right? 60 feet, even though their FAR isn't the most generous, Boulevard's MUB has a 2.25 FAR allowance, but the height doesn't comport with that. And so when you do have more generous zoning requirements, you are going to maybe, actually be able to take advantage of these inclusionary zoning requirements, and affordable housing will be more feasible. But if you kind of maintain this low mid-rise zoning structure, you are likely zoning out, affordable housing in kind of a significant way.
Right, cutting off your nose to spite your face. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, we just want 100% affordable housing, or why is it only 20%? Well, and the reason is because a for-profit developer is not going to build it if it's too affordable, because that means they're not going to make the money. Okay, fine, we'll have nonprofit developers. Sure, but what you're saying is people who have to pay the same fixed costs but don't seek a profit. So we'll reduce the project expense by 10 or 15%, which would have been that profit, but they're still paying a huge amount of money to build the thing. But who's paying for that? Because they can't charge the same rent, they can't charge for the same price. So the revenue is just not there to cover the cost. And so when you hear cities say, well, we want a 25% inclusionary housing ordinance, what they're saying is we want 0% affordable housing because it's just not going to get built. This is an example of what Santa Monica charges for developing residential units. I'll start on the right. single unit dwelling. So just a standard, single family home, 1,400, 1,600 square feet, whatever it is that fits on that lot, they're going to charge you about $36,000 in fees to build your home. If you want to build a 3-unit condo, though, it's going to cost you $125,000 per door. So smaller homes, probably a better use of land and resources, depending on some other factors, but co-locating people on a single same size parcel, it's going to cost you roughly 4 times as much money per front door. Why do we do that? And the other side of that question is, why would anybody choose to build that? Because if you can pay $35,000 for a house that's anywhere from 1,200 square feet to 3,000 square feet, depending on what the rules are the city uses, and then what does a 3,000 square foot home cost in Santa Monica? $4 million, $5 million, and I'm only going to pay $36,000 to get my building permits, versus an 800 square foot condo or 1,200 square foot condo, but I have to pay $125,000 for that condo. Oh, by the way, I have to do that 3 more times. There's just no way that you're going to convince any developer that condos are a great idea when the profit margin on a single family home is astronomical. And you can see they actually charge a little bit less per door for mixed use development, but you have to be a pretty savvy developer who can do mixed use with commercial uses, because building homes is one thing, but when you start trying to do commercial leases and long-term occupancy and timing the market so you don't install, you don't lease to businesses that are going to fail because there's just no market demand for that type of industry, it's much more complicated. So you're going to get single family dwellings over and over and over again in Santa Monica. Next slide, please. Very quickly, because I know I've taken a lot of time, just the median rent in Santa Monica is $3,200 a month. So 50% of people pay more than that, and 50% pay less. $3.9 million median home price in Santa Monica. So if you are paying $3,200 a month in rent, if you're exactly right on that 50%, you need, and we use that cost analysis of 30%, that 30% income standard, where you don't pay more than 30% of your income for housing. You need to make $10,666 a month or $120,000 a year to avoid being cost burdened in your housing. $120,000 a year to avoid cost burden when you are a renter in Santa Monica. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, that's more than 50% more than the median income for renters in Santa Monica, which is to say that every single renter in Santa Monica, more or less, is either cost burden or extremely cost burden, paying between 30 and 50% of their median income for rent, or more than 50% for their median income and rent. And of course, this story plays out across all of California. Black and Hispanic Latino communities or mixed communities are lower income earners, and so they bear a greater cost and a greater burden for housing affordability. Next slide, please. And so you see that in Santa Monica, because it's so expensive, almost half of their workforce commutes in. And Jess, who lives in the LA region, probably has some insights on the commuting issues in LA, because desirable places where people have jobs don't have enough housing, and people have to drive from, at least to Santa Monica, Lawndale, Torrance, Inglewood, far-flung places to get to a place of high opportunity. Next slide, please. And so you can see here, left side, $128,000 is what you need to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. But even a school teacher is only making, roughly $85,000 a year. If you work in any other industry, good luck. And so you've got to be a physician, a lawyer, a city manager or planning director. You have to have essentially managerial or executive level jobs to afford median rent in Santa Monica. But then that begs the question, if you had that kind of position and made that kind of money, why would you rent in Santa Monica instead of buy somewhere else? And so there's a constant brain drain, and there's a constant turnover of people as they find places that are more affordable. And while those issues are not necessarily affordable housing, they are part of this bigger picture about why affordable housing is so critical and why we should embrace it and not create these arbitrary constraints that make it impossible. Next slide, please. So just wanted to touch on one piece, which is that, like you might have heard earlier in the call, when the Zoom first started, and Jess was talking about farm worker housing, people with developmental disabilities and physical disabilities, farm workers, single parent households, seniors. These are special categories that cities must analyze and plan for in their housing elements, and not as like, wallpapering over problems or window dressing where they check a box. We use the word elderly in our housing element, so we're done. We don't have to talk about it anymore. You're supposed to meaningfully plan and create actionable policies and programs that help provide more housing opportunities for these special categories of people. And unless you see that in the housing element for your community or your city, then I would speak up. And the Kelsey is where I stole this wonderful graphic from, and they're one of the thought leaders in housing and disability advocacy and disability rights. So I encourage you to check out their website. Next slide, please. That's it from me. I did a lot of talking. Thank you for your patience and for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions online or offline. My email is john@yimblaw.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And thanks again.
John, can I actually have a follow-up question with you? So you talked about how the housing element does sort of a special look at groups that have like particular housing needs, like seniors and folks with developmental disabilities. Another part of the housing element that's really important is the identification of sites for affordable housing. And I wonder if you could just take like 3 to 5 minutes to talk about the role of the housing element in site identification and why that's important for affordable housing.
Yeah, so I'll try to be faster than that because this is a pretty dry part of this whole process. But every city, every county in their housing element must identify sites where the housing is going to go, where they're anticipating accommodating that housing. In major metropolitan regions, LA, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, it's 30 units per acre. So that's 30 apartments, that's 30 townhomes, 30 condos, whatever it may be, 30 dwelling units per acre of land. And in suburban areas like the Monterey Bay, like the Fresno metropolitan region, like Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, 20 dwelling units per acre. And most other places are either 10 or 15 dwelling units per acre. That's meant to really create sort of that baseline level of affordability, because as more doors, as more homes split the cost of a parcel, it's supposed to get more affordable. If you have an acre of dirt that costs $500,000 and one home goes on that acre, then that one home is going to cost you no less than $500,000. But if 100 homes go on there, because it's going to be a bigger development, then each home only pays $5,000 worth of dirt, and you make the development much more affordable in terms of land costs. If you have a lack of density in your city or a preference for low densities, you will have a hard time building housing that has to be affordable, whether that's senior housing, housing for people with developmental disabilities, housing for single income, single parent households. You cannot reasonably build cheaper product, not quality, but in price, less expensive product, if you do not have a density that will accommodate low land costs and low construction costs. And just like an assembly line, if you build one home and then you move over and you build another home and then you move over and build another home, that's different than building, and I'm just making up numbers here for conversation, that's different than building a 80-foot tall structure that's 40 feet wide and 40 feet deep, and then you build the floors inside of it and put up the walls, and now you've got an apartment building. It's cheaper to build in scale than it is to repeat a process. And if we're going to be providing homes for people who are in our communities, it's not like there's a community out there that doesn't have someone who uses a wheelchair. It's not like there's a community out there that doesn't have someone who has a developmental disability. There are seniors everywhere. There are single income, single parent households everywhere. And if we want to have a community where they're welcome and they're respected and their dignity is valued and acknowledged, they deserve decent and stable housing just like the rest of us. But that means the city must affirmatively and intentionally create housing opportunities that suit them. And that's part of that analysis.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that I get to partner with John. John is also from a small town. He's from Seaside. I grew up in Lodi, California. I think both of us have I don't know, we can relate to towns that are a bit smaller, right? Not Los Angeles, not San Diego or Sacramento, where they're still going through a growing phase, and need to find the right version of affordability. It's going to look probably a little different than Los Angeles, but we believe pretty strongly that everyone should have an affordable place to live, and we're getting to a point where our small towns aren't really providing that anymore. I look at the home prices in Lodi, and I know John can attest. In the Monterey Bay area, even really small places are pretty unaffordable to working class folks. So we're really excited about the housing element process because it really does apply to jurisdictions of all sizes, not just big cities. All right. So how do we use the housing element process, and what does it look like? And how can we kind of use it to our best advantage for us who want to promote affordable housing? So I'm breaking down and there's kind of innumerable steps, but I'm breaking the housing element process into 5 steps. The first is, where the Council of Governments in your region, for the Bay Area, that's Association of Bay Area Governments. For my area, that's Southern California Association of Governments, for SCAG. Bay Area's ABAG. For John's, it's AMBAG. It's delightful. Anyway, the region gets a really big number from the state, to kind of anticipate the amount of growth that your region will experience based on births, on population growth, on job growth, a bunch of different metrics. The regional agency, ABAG or SCAG, takes that big number and it divides it among the cities. And that's kind of the first step. And that allocation is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And that's that number that John talked about earlier. That's that total number. Whereas and that total number for each city is broken out into the affordable levels, the very low, moderate, and above moderate. And then that number is not just like what needs to be done this month, but that's like over the next 8 years. A lot of jurisdictions freak out about the number, but it's should be able to be done over the period of 8 years of planning. Okay, next step. Public outreach. This is not a nice to have, this is an actually need to have. The state requires that each jurisdiction perform diligent public outreach to all sectors of the community. That they kind of leave it vague. They don't have a step-by-step, like here's all of the organizations you have to reach out to, here's all of the demographics you have to reach out to. But that's where we as advocates can kind of say, hey, have you, city, have you reached out to this organization? Have you reached out to the day workers? Have you reached out to the farm workers? How have you reached out based on our knowledge of our jurisdiction? Have you made an effort to talk to everybody about their housing needs? So a lot of Bay Area cities are at this stage now. Honestly, a lot of Southern California cities are still doing this, and we are about like a year and a half ahead of you guys as far as our deadline. So basically all over the state are starting to do the public outreach. And that can take the form of, workshops or surveys, but also public meetings like planning commission meetings, city council meetings, and things like that. So the planning department is the department in charge of the housing element. I don't think I've heard of any other department taking it on. It's the planning department. Sometimes they have a consultant to do it for them, but the planning department is going to be that group of people that you're going to check on to see, how are you coming with the update? Are there any meetings coming up? So that's the department to keep an eye on. So it is a problem-solving document. Basically, the city is supposed to identify ways to promote housing in their jurisdiction. what are policies that we can put in place, what are partners we can work with, like affordable housing developers, like local nonprofits, and what kind of constraints do we have on our housing? John kind of pointed out some of those, like the inclusionary zoning that might be too high, maybe certain fees. Those are all governmental constraints, right? Things that the government decided on that can maybe be removed to help affordable housing happen. And then they also need to identify enough land that's zoned to accommodate that RHNA number through the site identification or the site inventory. And zoning is not a natural phenomenon. It's something that humans decide this is what we want. And so if there's, a town or a city, I live in Los Angeles and there's so much single family zoning here. So we have a lot of work to do, even in big cities. But a lot of times our smaller cities are like, well, we just have our low density zoning and that's the end. But that really can be changed. So zoning is a big part of the housing element as well. And then finally, cities that's new to this planning period is that they have to affirmatively further fair housing. So all of the sites that they identify for affordable housing can't be grouped into one part of the city. That is, something that is often done. It's like, oh, this great big vacant site by the airport, like what a great site for all the affordable housing. And I think we're kind of saying, it's time to be done with that. We want affordable housing to be able to be patterned throughout the city. That's another way that we as local advocates can kind of identify, what our sites and what our strategies that we can use to make that happen instead of clumping all the affordable housing into one neighborhood. So once the housing element is ready to go, it is approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council. They might have submitted it to the state before to just get some preliminary comments, but eventually they'll adopt it and they will by vote, and they'll send it to the state as their kind of final project. And that due date for that kind of final submission for the Bay Area is January 2023. And for Southern California, I've seen a lot of Southern California people here, it's October of this year, 2021. Then it goes to the state for review. And the state will give us a 30-day period for public comments on the draft once they receive it. So this is a good chance for you to kind of advocate on behalf of affordable housing there. HCD can refuse to certify and give them a correction letter. They might conditionally approve it, or they will, eventually, hopefully, certify a very good housing element once all the requirements are met. And then that serves as a commitment throughout the whole 8 years. And a city can actually fall out of compliance during the planning period. And we can actually drop in the chat a document about some of the legal consequences of a city falling out of compliance. John, if you want to find that, that'd be cool. So what is our role as advocates? I know we're kind of getting further along in the hour, so I'll kind of jump through this part so we can all chat. So during the first beginning stages, which is kind of where a lot of the Bay Area folks are, but even there's opportunity for us in Southern California too, is to start connecting with your local groups and organizations. SV at Home is doing their kickoff event, which is awesome. Get educated on housing element policy. It can get kind of technical. So, there's a lot to learn there. And then you can also tell your city that you're interested in the housing element and that you want to be part of the task force. You want to be on the interested parties list. And if you want to learn more, we have a resource library at our website. That's the link right there. It's also pretty easy to find on the website too. So we, have tried to collate a lot of resources for you guys as advocates, all in one place. Second step, engage with the public outreach. Keep your ears out for those public workshops, for the Planning Commission meetings, City Council meetings, and speak up. If you may not, be opining on specific things that they have in their documents, but even you just like saying, hey, I am a resident here, or I'm a resident of the region. Affordable housing is a huge need for me. This is my story. So I really hope you, support affordable housing in the housing element. Hearing those voices is really important, because a lot of times the voices that they're hearing are like, no, 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 we can't have any more housing, no multifamily housing. And so being a voice of support is super important. We at YIMBY Law have a campaign calendar to sort of make it easy for folks to learn when the meetings are coming up, so that you can kind of attend and make your voice known in those meetings. And you can view it at our website there. Very similar, when the public meetings are actually happening, beyond just the workshops, that actually the commission meetings, the city council meetings, those are super important to make a public comment, either spoken or via email. That goes on the record, and the state can actually see, oh, look at all these affordable housing advocates made these comments over time, and city, you did not listen to any of them, and you didn't really do a good job with finding sites and blah blah blah. So getting our voices on the record is super important. We have a program at YIMBY Law to report back on meetings, which is pretty fun. It's a way for us to kind of keep track of what's happening in those decision-making rooms. And it's at that website for housingelements.org/report. And it can help us keep kind of a record of what's happening. And so if cities do fail at their responsibilities, we'll be able to point back at that. When the drafts come out, we definitely need folks to read them. Sometimes they're like 100 pages, but you can kind of zoom into the topics that you're interested in. Maybe it's the specific housing needs of special groups. Maybe it's the site inventory. Kind of all depends on your preference. We've also created an audit tool, which we're really excited about. And it comes with an explainer to kind of give you a view into some of the more technical details. And then finally, after the housing element is adopted, you guys know the drill about affordable housing. You have to keep advocating. Projects will be approved, and it's a really great way for your local group to keep advocating for affordable housing in those public rooms, because you've already showed up during the housing element process, and you can help the city kind of continue to commit to those promises they made in the housing element throughout the 8-year period. And then, of course, you're welcome to join us as YIMBY Law or YIMBY Action. A lot of you already have your local organizations that you're a part of. You could start your own group with an affiliation. We work with a group of ladies at a Unitarian church, and they're like the best. We work with students at a school. So it doesn't have to be a YIMBY organization necessarily. It can be a really informal group and just like a group of friends even. So that is about it. If you want to join us, please go to fairhousingelements.org/volunteer. I see a lot of our watchdogs in that call already, so I really love to see you guys here. And that is about it for us.